The courtroom was silent, unnaturally so. The kind of silence that suffocates. Everyone stared at the young man standing in front of the bench, 17-year-old Elijah Mercer. Dressed in a navy suit a size too big, his hands were clenched, trembling at his sides. His brown eyes were locked on the floor. The only sound came from the judge's steady voice. Life in prison. Without the possibility of parole. Gasps erupted from the gallery. Elijah's mother cried out before collapsing into the arms of her sister. The prosecutor smirked slightly, while the bailiff moved closer to the teen, ready to restrain him if needed. Elijah didn't move. He didn't yell. He didn't beg. Instead, he asked softly, "Can I make one phone call?" The judge raised an eyebrow, annoyed by the request but waved his hand. "Make it fast." Elijah nodded and took out the phone handed to him by the bailiff. His fingers didn't shake anymore. He dialed. 1 ring. 2. "Dad," Elijah said into the receiver. It happened. There was a pause, a cold, terrifying pause. Then, Elijah spoke again, clearer this time, eyes locked on the judge. "Yes. He gave me life." And then Elijah said something that made the entire courtroom freeze. "I know you told me not to pull the card. But I need you now. Mr. Attorney General." The silence was shattered by an eruption of whispers. A few people stood. Even the court reporter stopped typing. The judge's face twisted. What did you just say?" Elijah slowly handed the phone to the bailiff. "He wants to talk to you." The judge took a step back. Because the voice on the other end? It was the most powerful law enforcement official in the United States. And he was furious. The judge hesitated before taking the phone. His usual arrogance flickered into confusion, then dread. The courtroom was still, not a soul dared to breathe. "Hello?" the judge said, clearing his throat. The voice that answered was unmistakable. Calm, deliberate, and thunderous in its authority. "This is U.S. Attorney General Malcolm Mercer." "Who am I speaking to?" "Judge Bernard Lowell," the judge answered, standing taller, as if trying to regain his composure. "I've just sentenced a young man. I know what you did," the voice snapped. "And you just made a mistake that's going to follow you for the rest of your life." The color drained from Judge Lowell's face. The Attorney General's voice was controlled, but seething. "You've ignored evidence, dismissed multiple witnesses, and fast-tracked a sentencing hearing that should have never reached this courtroom. I've been watching. I warned you. And now you've gone too far." The judge sputtered. "Sir, I applied the law." "You applied nothing but ego and assumption," Mercer interrupted. "And you thought no one would question you because you were dealing with a kid who kept quiet through it all. That kid happens to be my son. And now, you're going to answer for this. Publicly. Legally. Immediately." Gasps and murmurs spread across the room again. The prosecutor's confident expression turned pale. The bailiff's hand slowly released its grip from Elijah's shoulder. Judge Lowell held the phone, frozen. The voice continued. "I'm sending a federal review team to your courthouse today. The conviction is being challenged. You'll cooperate fully, or I'll personally file a judicial misconduct complaint with the Senate Judiciary Committee by sundown." Lowell's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Elijah stood there, calm. Not triumphant. Just tired. He turned to his mother, whose tear-streaked face had gone from despair to disbelief. Her son wasn't walking out of that courtroom yet. But for the first time, it looked like justice might finally be on its way in. The courtroom was chaos masked in silence. The judge slowly handed the phone back to the bailiff, his fingers stiff. He looked like a man who just realized his robe couldn't shield him anymore. Elijah stood tall now, no longer the scared teen who had walked in moments earlier. The weight of the life sentence hadn't disappeared, but something in the air had shifted. Something massive was coming. The prosecutor, a man named Thomas Blaine, leaned over and whispered sharply to the judge. "What the hell is happening? That kid's dad is who?" Lowell didn't answer. He sat down heavily, suddenly looking much older. Elijah turned around and looked at the courtroom gallery, and more specifically, at the two jurors who had seemed unsure during the trial but had ultimately voted guilty. Their faces were ghost white. Then the doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. Two sharply dressed federal agents stepped in. "Special Agents Carter and Vega, Department of Justice," one announced, holding up a badge. "We're here under direct order from the U.S. Attorney General. This court is now under active federal review. All parties will remain in place until instructed otherwise." Blaine stood up, voice cracking. "You can't just barge in here." "We can," Carter said, walking toward the bench. "And we have a signed warrant for full access to case files, court transcripts, and all communications related to United States versus Elijah Mercer." Judge Lowell reached for his gavel, but his hand stopped midair. Because Agent Vega had already placed a sealed envelope on the bench, with the DOJ seal and the Attorney General's signature in bold black ink. "Sir," Vega said, staring directly at him, "you are being placed under preliminary investigation for judicial bias, procedural misconduct, and abuse of power." The courtroom exploded in murmurs and gasps again. Elijah's mother gripped her son's hand. For the first time in weeks, her fingers weren't shaking, the cameras were already outside. Reporters had caught wind of something erupting in courtroom 2B, but none of them had guessed the scale of it. Inside, Judge Lowell sat motionless, his authority dissolving by the second. His once commanding tone was gone. Now, his eyes darted toward the side exit, as if he could somehow escape the very walls closing in on him. Agent Carter's voice cut through the tension. "Until further notice, this court is suspended from issuing binding rulings related to this case. Mr. Mercer is to be remanded into federal protective custody pending a full DOJ investigation." Gasps again. The bailiff, who just minutes ago had stood like a wall next to Elijah, now stepped aside, almost out of respect. Elijah looked at the agents, then at his mom. She nodded through tears. "Go, baby." He followed Agent Vega without cuffs. Not a prisoner, but a young man now at the center of a storm much bigger than anyone in that room had expected. As Elijah walked past the gallery, the same people who had judged him with silent eyes now looked away, ashamed, cornered by the truth. Thomas Blaine, the prosecutor, tried to salvage what little control he had left. "This is highly irregular," he snapped. There was overwhelming evidence. Agent Carter turned and stared him down. "Overwhelming? Like the two eyewitnesses your office failed to disclose? Or the phone footage your staff misplaced?" Blaine's mouth fell open. "We know," Vega added. "We've got everything. Emails, call logs, even pressure from local donors to make an example. You picked the wrong kid, and the wrong family." Judge Lowell finally spoke, voice weak. "I didn't know who he was." Carter didn't flinch. "And you still gave him life. Because you thought no one would fight back." Then he leaned closer. "But now the whole country's watching." Outside the courthouse, a media frenzy had already begun. Satellite trucks lined the streets. Reporters shouted over each other. Cameras flashed. The news cycle had a new obsession, and Elijah Mercer was now a national name. Inside a secure DOJ vehicle, Elijah sat across from Agent Vega. The car moved smoothly through traffic, escorted by unmarked SUVs. "Do you understand what's happening now?" Vega asked. Elijah nodded slowly. "I think so. My dad warned me this could happen. That once I stepped into that courtroom, I'd be on my own, until I wasn't." Vega studied him. "Your father didn't just send us. He made this personal. He said if this country's going to claim to stand for justice, it better start proving it, starting with you." Elijah didn't speak. He looked out the window as the courthouse faded behind them. Back inside the courtroom, agents were collecting every file, every scrap of paper. The courtroom was no longer a place of judgment, it was now evidence. Judge Lowell slumped in his chair, his reputation crumbling in real time. Prosecutor Blaine tried to leave quietly, but reporters were waiting outside the back door. He was met with a swarm of mics and flashbulbs. "Did you knowingly suppress evidence, Mr. Blaine? Why did you fast-track the sentencing? Did campaign donors influence the prosecution?" No answers. Just silence and sweat. And in Washington, D.C., a press conference podium was being prepared. The seal of the United States Department of Justice hung behind it. Soon, Malcolm Mercer, the U.S. Attorney General and Elijah's father, would step into the spotlight. He wasn't coming as a father. He was coming as a reckoning. The press conference room was packed wall to wall. Reporters, political analysts, legal experts, and even members of Congress filled the seats. The room buzzed with anticipation, every camera locked onto the podium. Then the doors opened. U.S. Attorney General Malcolm Mercer entered, flanked by federal officials. His face was calm, but his eyes held fire. He approached the mic, adjusted it slightly, and began. "This morning, my 17-year-old son, Elijah Mercer, was sentenced to life in prison without parole. The sentence was handed down after a trial filled with procedural violations, withheld evidence, and improper judicial conduct." The room was dead silent. Let me be absolutely clear, I did not intervene during the investigation or the trial. I allowed the system to operate, hoping it would do what it promises every American: fairness, due process, and truth. He paused, eyes scanning the room. It failed. A few reporters leaned forward, pens flying across their notebooks. Mercer continued, voice growing sharper. "The Department of Justice is now opening a full federal inquiry into the court procedures and prosecutorial decisions in the case of United States versus Elijah Mercer. Preliminary findings already suggest a pattern of abuse that extends beyond just one courtroom." Whispers rippled through the crowd. "This is not just about my son. It's about every young person who walks into a courtroom already treated as guilty. It's about every corner of the justice system where unchecked power becomes a weapon." A beat of silence. "Let me be clear, I will recuse myself from direct involvement moving forward. But I will ensure that the full force of the Justice Department is used to bring the truth to light. And if corruption is found, it will be prosecuted." He stepped back from the podium briefly, but then turned to the cameras for one final statement. To the judge who thought no one would challenge his verdict, to the prosecutor who thought he could bury the facts, and to anyone else who's made a career out of silent injustice, he leaned in slightly. "Your silence is over." Flashbulbs erupted as he walked away. The fallout began instantly. Within 24 hours of the Attorney General's statement, the Justice Department released a preliminary report, and it was damning. Evidence had been suppressed. Witness statements had been altered. Communications between the prosecutor's office and local political donors revealed a coordinated push to send a message with Elijah's conviction. News networks ran split screens, Elijah's face on one side, Judge Lowell's on the other. One looked like a symbol of resilience. The other, a symbol of everything wrong with the system. At the DOJ's direction, federal investigators subpoenaed the entire communications history of the DA's office. Prosecutor Thomas Blaine tried to resign, but it was too late. He was indicted within a week for obstruction of justice and conspiracy to tamper with evidence. Judge Lowell tried to hold a press briefing of his own, but it backfired spectacularly. "I was misled," he said nervously, facing the cameras. "The evidence presented to me was manipulated with your approval," one journalist cut in. "How do you explain the text messages between you and Blaine referencing Elijah as a slam dunk win?" Lowell stuttered. His press conference was over before it ever began. Meanwhile, Elijah remained in protective custody under federal watch. Not in a cell, but a private facility far from the media. He hadn't spoken to the press. He hadn't posted on social media. But that didn't stop millions of people from speaking for him. Online, the hashtag Elijah was set up trended worldwide. Civil rights organizations, student activists, even celebrities began demanding more than just an investigation, they wanted reform. Elijah's silence became power. And soon, a federal court would decide not just his fate, but whether the entire case would be thrown out on the grounds of gross misconduct. 2 weeks later, the day finally came. Elijah sat at a long table inside a federal courtroom in Washington, D.C., a very different courtroom than the one that had nearly buried him. His posture was calm but firm, flanked by a team of top civil rights attorneys. No cuffs. No guards breathing down his neck. Across the aisle, the state prosecutor's office looked like a sinking ship. Blaine, disgraced and disbarred, had been replaced by a nervous assistant DA trying to salvage what little credibility remained. The federal judge entered, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Judge Evelyn Rourke. She looked over her glasses and spoke with clarity. This court has reviewed the findings of the DOJ's investigation, along with all suppressed materials, transcripts, and testimony. The misconduct discovered in the case of United States v. Elijah Mercer is staggering. Blaine shifted in his seat. Judge Rourke continued. This wasn't a mistake. It was an orchestration. A deliberate effort to secure a conviction based on public pressure, not on facts. She turned to Elijah. Mr. Mercer, this court finds your conviction invalid. You are hereby exonerated of all charges. The room didn't erupt. It exhaled. Elijah closed his eyes. Not in celebration, in release. Like finally breathing air after being underwater for too long. His mother sobbed quietly, gripping his hand like it might disappear. His legal team exchanged relieved glances. But the judge wasn't finished. She looked toward the prosecution's table. Let the record also reflect, this court is referring Judge Bernard Lowell and former DA Thomas Blaine to the DOJ for possible criminal prosecution. Every camera in the courtroom clicked at once. Elijah rose, thanked the judge, and walked out. Not in handcuffs. Not in shame. But as a free man, and a symbol, the walk out of the courthouse was unlike anything Elijah had imagined. Federal agents escorted him past rows of cameras, microphones, and flashing lights. His face remained steady, no smile, no grand gestures. Just quiet dignity. His mother clung to his arm, tears flowing freely. Beside them, Attorney General Malcolm Mercer stood tall, not as the head of the DOJ today, but as a father who had just watched his son survive the worst kind of injustice. They didn't speak as they stepped up to the podium. Reporters shouted questions. Elijah, what would you say to the judge now? Do you want revenge? Mr. Attorney General, will you push for prison time for those involved? But Elijah raised one hand, signaling silence. When it came, he spoke into the mic with a voice that was steady but raw. I was 17. I was accused, convicted, and sentenced to die in prison, before I'd even had a chance to live. He paused. Let that hang in the air. I didn't win because I was lucky. I didn't win because I had power. I won because the truth finally had a microphone louder than the lies. He looked directly at the cameras. And this isn't just about me. I'm not the only one. There are thousands of people just like me, without powerful parents, without cameras, without anyone to believe them. We don't just need justice. We need a system that doesn't break kids just to prove a point. The crowd was quiet now, fully, deeply listening. I don't want revenge, Elijah said finally. I want accountability. I want change. Then he stepped back. And the cheers erupted, loud, raw, emotional. He had walked into that courtroom as a convicted teenager. He walked out a movement, weeks passed, but the world hadn't moved on, not this time. Elijah's case became a flashpoint in national debates. His photo was on magazine covers. Law schools dissected the case. Talk shows, podcasts, and news panels all asked the same question: how many Elijahs never got a second chance? Under pressure from the public, Congress launched a bipartisan inquiry into judicial misconduct and prosecutorial abuse in youth sentencing. Hearings were broadcast live. The phrase, Elijah's Law, began trending, a proposed federal act aimed at increasing oversight of juvenile cases and ensuring mandatory transparency in evidence disclosure. At rallies across the country, teenagers held signs that read, "I could have been Elijah." Meanwhile, former Judge Bernard Lowell and ex-DA Thomas Blaine were both indicted. Their private texts, leaked emails, and backdoor deals were now public knowledge, and they faced decades in federal prison for conspiracy and obstruction. But Elijah? He didn't hide from the spotlight, and he didn't chase it either. He returned home and enrolled in community college, majoring in criminal justice. When asked why, he answered simply, "I want to fix the system that tried to erase me." The last scene the public saw of him, at least for now, wasn't on a stage or in a courtroom. It was a grainy photo, captured by a student phone camera. Elijah sitting at the back of a classroom. Quiet. Listening. Free. But never silent again. It didn't take long for Elijah's story to reach global attention. International news outlets picked it up. Lawmakers in other countries cited his case in their own debates on youth justice reform. Activists from South Africa to London began organizing under a simple banner, #Justice for Elijah, Justice for All. But for Elijah, fame wasn't the goal. It never had been. He declined lucrative interview offers. He turned down book deals, documentaries, even a Netflix series. Instead, he started showing up, quietly, at juvenile detention centers across the country. Not to speak from a stage, but to sit in circles with other young people who felt voiceless. He listened to their stories. And when they asked how he made it through, he always said the same thing: "I didn't wait for someone to save me. I told the truth and didn't stop telling it." Meanwhile, the Justice Department announced the formation of a permanent federal oversight unit dedicated to monitoring high-risk courts for misconduct. They named it the Mercer Initiative. Some saw it as a political move. Others called it justice, finally done right. But Elijah didn't care about headlines anymore. He kept showing up, kept learning, kept working. And one day, as he walked through the doors of his first law school class, the professor paused mid-sentence, stunned. The room erupted in applause. Not because he was famous, but because every person in that room knew, they were witnessing the beginning of something far bigger than a trial. They were witnessing a future built by someone who had survived the fire, and decided to become the flame. 3 years later, the Supreme Court heard a landmark case. It wasn't about Elijah, but it bore his fingerprints. The case challenged mandatory life sentences for minors, arguing they violated the spirit of rehabilitation and fairness. Elijah sat quietly in the gallery, now a second-year law student clerking for a federal judge. He wasn't the headline this time. He wasn't the story. But his presence was a reminder. A reminder that justice delayed wasn't always justice denied, but it was always justice endangered. The court ruled 6-3 in favor of reform. Life without parole for minors would no longer be mandatory, and thousands of cases across the country would be re-examined. As the decision was read aloud, Elijah closed his eyes. Not out of relief, but out of responsibility. Outside the court, reporters waited again, just like they had years ago. This time, they asked, "Elijah, what's next for you?" He smiled. "I'm applying to the DOJ Honors Program. I want to prosecute people who think the system's just a game." The crowd murmured. "And someday," he added, "I want to wear that robe. But not to destroy lives. To protect them." Then he walked away, through the same marble halls that once watched him nearly disappear. This time, the system didn't break him. This time, he came back to rebuild it.